But we begin tonight with exclusive news from an off-the-record, at times tense, White House meeting today on torture, military tribunals, and potential prosecutions of Bush administration officials. A meeting held at the White House on the eve of President Obama's big speech tomorrow on Guantánamo. President Obama announced his decision to shut down the prison at Guantánamo on his second day in office. The decision seen at the time as expected and relatively uncontroversial. Even his general election opponent, John McCain, had said that he would close Guantánamo if he were elected as well. But since his first week in office, the president's decisions on constitutional issues have been an escalating series of disappointments for civil libertarians. The president would maintain a system of essentially lawless detention, keeping the prison at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan as a legal no-man's land, a place outside judicial recourse, even as the government moved to close another extrajudicial facility at Guantánamo. The president would not support calls for an independent commission to investigate violations of the laws against torture during the last presidency. The president would not support the release of additional photos of prisoner abuse, a 180-degree reversal for this new administration, which had previously supported the decision to make the images available. And most recently, another 180-degree reversal from the president, a decision to maintain the Bush administration's cobbled-together system of military tribunals at Guantánamo, a system that candidate Obama had derided as incapable of administering anything worthy of the term justice. Well, tomorrow the president is due to speak about Guantánamo at 10 a.m. Eastern in Washington, D.C. According to the White House, the president will explain the decisions he's already made on Guantánamo and will offer a new framework for moving forward. Tonight, on the eve of that speech, we have information exclusive to this show to report about an off-the-record meeting that happened today between President Obama and leading human rights and civil liberties groups at the White House. Although the meeting was off the record, we can report that the president was told by a member of one of those groups that he is allowing President Bush's policies to become his own. We can report that the president was demonstrably not pleased with that characterization, but that he gave no ground on the issues of military commissions, potential prosecutions of former Bush administration officials for torture, or investigations of Bush-era torture policy. Amid very late breaking news tonight that a prisoner from Guantánamo may, for the first time, be coming to the United States for trial in a civilian court, even as the military tribunals at Guantánamo are kept going by this administration, Obama's relationship with the left and with the constitutionalists who thought of him as one of their own have never been more strained. Joining us now is Michael Isikoff, Newsweek investigative reporter and MSNBC contributor, and the source of this reporting. Mike, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Rachel.
I have to ask you, just as a premise, if this was an off-the-record meeting, how do you know about it?
It's called reporting. Look, there were a lot of people there. It was a pretty extraordinary meeting. Leaders of a lot of the human rights groups, civil liberties groups. And what I found even more remarkable was who was there from the White House. It took place in the cabinet room, convened by President Obama. White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, David Axelrod, Attorney General Eric Holder, White House Counsel Greg Craig were all there sitting in on this meeting. I think a sign of just how seriously they take the rebellion, if that is not too strong a word, they're getting from the left. At the same time, they're being pummeled from the right on this issue, as reflected in that Senate vote. In fact, the Senate was voting today, 90-6, to deny any funding for shutting down Guantánamo or transferring any detainees to the United States at the very moment that these liberal human rights and civil liberties groups were complaining that the president is moving too far to the right in this White House meeting.
Do we know that this is a meeting that the White House called rather than the groups asked for? Do we know what the purpose of the meeting was?
Yeah, I think that after last week's announcement about military commissions, when a lot of these groups and their leaders were critical of what the president was doing, the White House felt the need to reach out to them, to bring them in, try to bring them into the fold, and hear what they had to say. The leaders of these groups repeated many many of their criticisms. They expressed concerns that some of the premises that Obama was using on military commissions, on the prospect that we might get indefinite detention of some of the Gitmo detainees, holding them indefinitely without trial, in moving in this direction, he was accepting some of the same premises as the Bush administration. They laid that out. Obama didn't like that. He started out the meeting by complaining at one point about the mess he'd been left by his predecessor. And when some of these interest groups raised, some of these human rights groups raised this, he was quite clear he didn't like it. He said it's not helpful to equate me with President Bush.
Let's take a specific example, one of these specific issues, the subject of torture prosecutions, the possibility of maybe a truth commission or a commission of inquiry of some kind onto the issue of torture. Your sources are telling you that the president remained firmly against pursuing any of those things at this meeting today. But is there any sense of what his arguments are to defend that stance, or is it still just this generic assertion that we need to move forward and not look back?
Well, actually, it was interesting. When the Truth Commission came up towards the end of the meeting, the president had a somewhat different explanation for his resistance to that. He talked about all the congressional investigations that were going on, the litigation that was going on, and he said it was too distracting to his staff, that too much time was being taken up. He actually looked directly at Attorney General Holder, who was present at the meeting, and indicating that Holder was having to spend too much time on this issue. Now, some of those present have made the point that that's the reason to have a 9/11 style commission. Instead of having many congressional investigations, have one presidentially backed commission with subpoena power that can do all this. And the president didn't necessarily reject that, but he raised this issue of a distraction, too much time. Then after that, one of those present raised the idea of a criminal prosecution, even one criminal prosecution, as a symbol, sort of, a trophy, I think the word was used, to show that such conduct would not, for torture, to show that such conduct would not be tolerated again, and the president sort of curtly dismissed the idea, made it clear he had no interest in that. What was interesting about that is his Attorney General, again, Eric Holder, sat there silently, didn't say a word. The president could have said...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. The president could have said that's Eric Holder's decision to make, but he didn't. He seemed to cut it off.
I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Mike. That's exactly what I was going to interject to say. That seems like the biggest news here. If the president has publicly said, listen, this is up to the Attorney General to decide whether or not it's appropriate to pursue criminal investigations and prosecutions. This is not a political matter. This is a law enforcement matter, and the Justice Department does not work for the president. It works to enforce the laws of the United States. And then he's meeting with people who are advocating investigations and prosecutions and answering on behalf of his Attorney General. That's news, because that would imply that what he's saying publicly and what he's saying in private meetings behind the scenes are not at all the same thing.
Well, this is, I think, an important issue. We've discussed this before on this show, that the whole idea of criminal prosecutions really ought to be left up to the Justice Department based on the facts and the law, the evidence. The one thing you don't want to have happen is political considerations. Now, in this case, it may just be political considerations of, we want to get health care through the Congress. We want to get climate change through the Congress. It's not helpful to have, in our efforts to get Republican support for that, to have criminal investigations underway that's just going to alienate the Republicans. And I think the comeback to that is that's not a proper consideration when you're trying to decide whether somebody broke the law or not. Those political factors should not have any influence whatsoever.
There's a reason why the top law enforcement official of the United States is not the President of the United States, but rather the Attorney General. Incredible news, incredible reporting. Michael Isikoff, MSNBC contributor, investigative correspondent for Newsweek. It's invaluable stuff. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Rachel.